How people had it before the war is always an interesting topic of conversation when talking about Fallout 4. More specifically, we mean how bad people had it, as many of the areas we've looked at over the years show, time and again, that things weren't all sunshine and rainbows. Today, at Mytics Pines, located near Lexington, named for a lake in real life, we get an excellent example of this. A look into how the elderly were treated, which is generally seen as a good litmus test for what a society is really like. To be honest, it doesn't seem great, and I'm pretty sure this place had a pretty dark secret underneath it, literally. Before that, a quick reminder to enable notifications and click the bell icon if you haven't, as I know some of you are still finding you miss my videos when they come out. Additionally, likes and comments really help, as it affects how the algorithm treats this channel. There has been a lot of demand for shorter form videos from all of you, presumably due to how successful shorts on the platform have been. So if this video does well, I'll be sure to start releasing more like this. Now, let's take a look at this place. Walking up to this lovely prison for the elderly, it looks pretty grim. And I don't mean because it was bathed in atomic fire and then left for 2 centuries. I mean because it's in the shadow of a large overpass, which pretty much ruins the view of the lake behind it. Walking in, we can see the yard is full of the third most likely object to have been utilised as a new form of currency post-war, the lawn flamingo. In front of it, of course, are the plunger and the bottle cap, the current number 1. Moving up the path to the entrance, we can already see some abandoned wheelchairs, some ominously buried in the ground, likely along with their former occupants' remains. Others just left where they were likely abandoned, although we don't know how far their former occupants would have got, especially if they completely relied on them. Just inside, we can see the roof has collapsed, and the rest of the place is looking pretty rough as well. Some Halloween decorations are still up. I question the point of this, as surely the encroachment of death was fear enough in all these old people's lives. They didn't need additional spooking. Then again, it could have just been the staff looking for excuses to dress up as Grim Reapers, I suppose. We can see some signs, both inside and out the front, that someone has been using this place for shelter, or actually living here. Perhaps the rude fishermen that we see later on, or some raiders near Lexington. It's hard to say. Moving down the hall to the left of the entrance, we can head outside to get a look at the side porch of the building. It looks like there was someone here getting something put into them by an IV bag, or some similar apparatus that hung from one of these poles. Heading back inside, we can come to the first room, or I guess rooms, as technically it is too, with a wall missing. Here we find our first skeleton, which I presume is the remains of one of the former residents here. Beside them is a tray that would have likely had their medication on it, except it has jets, which we know is post-war, or at least it was until the uncertain retcons I covered in my retcon video. But let's say it was retconned, and it's pre-war. Why was this being offered to an old woman? I suppose this could have been hospice care, but you wouldn't use a drug that slows the perception of time, surely. Or at least I would have thought that wouldn't be okay. But maybe it was a special last request. Or someone after the bombs fell just decided to have some fun and put it here. Possibly the person who was living here, going off of the lights we can find around the place. While some of the deaths here are harder to nail down as directly due to the fallout, as we know people have survived, even closer to the glowing sea, I think this woman dying due to it is a safe bet. The room next to this one has no occupant. However, what it does have are several toys present, so possibly kept here for the previous occupant's grandchildren to play with. Or, going off the boxes under the bed, this one was generally used for storage, and these were kept here for when children did come round. Also yes, I too have noticed the disappearing ghost boxes under the bed, kind of like the cardboard equivalent of a weeping angel. There's also the possibility that these are the former residents' toys, if the room did indeed have one, possibly mementos of their childhood or family. Now, we'll get to the basement area soon, and all that entails, but first off, I want to take a look at the rest of what is found on this floor. A garden area overlooks the overpass down the hall. I expect this was a type of daily activity to keep the elderly residents active, and give them a sight to look at. Now that seems cruel at first, but if you consider the home may predate the overpass, it isn't as bad. Likely there was no way to reposition it without a vast increase in building costs, and putting it over the lake could be an issue for maintenance or if anything happened. So they settled on putting the overpass beside the lake, destroying the view the elderly once had. Maybe that comes off as a bit of hyperbole, but come on, having that looming over you can't be a great feeling. The cynic in me also wonders if this indoor garden wasn't set up so the resulting produce could be sold on for profit. Given what we'll see very soon, and if it does mean what I think it means, then I think this type of cynicism is well earned. Beside this indoor garden, we find the resident who I imagine was both the best crack and the biggest arsehole, at least for the staff. We can find them in this locked room, or at least it had a maglock when we got here, but obviously we sorted that out. Inside, we can find this guy in a wheelchair, surrounded by beers. I imagine this room was probably the main storage area for the whole building, hence the lock, and it also had the medkits in here as well. Likely, once upon a time, there was probably a lot more in the way of supplies in here. Now we can find 2 crates of beer in here, and not enough bottles to account for that. So either he got into the remains of the private stash of the staff, or they already drank a lot of them somewhere else before coming in here. Given it's locked, it raises the question of how they did end up in here. Did the staff put them in here pre-war? Did they sneak in here and the bombs dropping caused the door to lock, trapping them? Or did someone else put them here after all that happened? If we do go down the path of reasoning that the old people here survived the bombs, likely abandoned by their former carers, or the carers died. It's hard to say. If they did this themselves, then they likely died when the bombs hit, or were simply trapped here and starved to death. Outside that room, we can find another body. Now honestly, I have to wonder if this wasn't the exact same pose they had in life, and it didn't change at all when they died. Just a posture that says, "I'm done, please will the sweet embrace of death envelop me to release me from my suffering." So pretty standard stuff. If the bombs did take them, then they were probably already like this to begin with. If not, then it begs the question why they chose here to die. Possibly a relative that came to find a parent or a grandparent after all that happened, only to discover they'd already passed on. It would be a real shame if this is one of the staff, who had stayed behind to take care of any of the elderly here who had no one to come and get them, which is pretty likely, as we'll see very soon. Most of the rest of the place is cleaned out, and this makes perfect sense as this was more or less in the region that people seem to have survived the blast, to a certain degree. As a result, there'd be plenty of looters to clean out the place, and this would have happened a long time ago. The last room here, given the double bed and 2 wheelchairs, may very well have belonged to a couple. This isn't unheard of, it's just that usually, when people end up in homes or folds like this, it's after a partner has passed on and they don't have the means to take care of themselves, or they were on their own in the first place. Rare is it that both can no longer take care of themselves and go to one together. Unless of course this wasn't a home with any carers. Honestly, it is hard to determine as we don't have more information. However, given the number of wheelchairs, I find it pretty unlikely there'd be this many people who required care and there wasn't at least one present. Now that we've taken a look at the rooms, it's time to go into the darker and altogether sadder details of this place. If we head back to the door that says restricted area near the gardening room, we can head down the stairs to the basement. Here we can find the generator, and also some coffins as well. Now this raises a lot of questions. If someone died here, they'd be brought to a hospital, then to a funeral home or a coroner's for a proper care and preparation for a burial. There is no reason why this place would need to be doing it themselves. Never mind the fact that they don't actually have anywhere to prepare the bodies. Unless they were also doing that down here, which is still pretty fucked up. It could be that some of the people here literally had no one else, and therefore no one to take care of the preparations, should they die. Therefore, Mytics Pines took care of it for them. But from this, it looks like they just stuck them in a coffin and dumped them in the ground. I say this because we can actually find the graveyard out the back of the building, and we'll look at that in just a minute. But focusing again on this place, I wonder if something more sinister wasn't going on. The people were brought here, kept in poor conditions, possibly having their remaining savings taken off of them along with their belongings, which is something that has occurred to the elderly in the past. People just love exploiting them. Then they die, and the home has their remains interred here, before the families can get involved or investigate or find out that something's went wrong. This is of course just wild speculation on my part, but hey, that's what you're here for. Heading around the back of the building, we can find 4 gravestones, all presumably with bodies buried in the graves they mark. Along with this, we can find a woman in a wheelchair who looks like they died while visiting the grave of someone, possibly a relative of theirs that was here at Mytics Pines. However, given that they're also in a wheelchair, suggesting they too could be elderly, I'm going to say they were also a resident here. For this reason, I wonder if she wasn't one of the individuals in that double room we saw. Yes, there were already 2 wheelchairs in there, but she could have had a spare. That would mean she outlived her partner, and came here to place flowers on their grave. Them being buried here again leads me to believe that these elderly people didn't have any other relatives, or at least the ones here didn't, if they had in fact opted to be interred here, among the people they knew, instead of a proper cemetery. I would wonder at the legality of this, to be honest. This is all supposing this was pre-war, and this woman died when the bombs hit. If they did all survive, and were just left here, then these could be the graves they had to dig for their friends and fellow residents here. Now how they managed this, given both the environment at the time, and their physical conditions, I have no idea. I guess they just shrugged and got on with it in typical "I'm old, and I've seen and been through some shit" fashion. I know, how did they not die? Why did they, and by extension a lot of other people, survive when others didn't? I don't know. Genes, healthy living, somehow just not succumbing to radiation, or at least doing so slower than others, perhaps medication. There could be a lot of factors. The last part to talk about is down by the lake behind Mytics Pines, and my reasoning is pretty much just proximity, and because one of the people there is in a wheelchair. So heading down to the lake, we can come to this lovely scene, lit by candles either the fishermen lit, or they were the ever-burning Encanto variety. We can find two bodies here, one of which is the aforementioned individual in a wheelchair, so I am assuming they were from Mytics Pines, but there's no guarantee this is the case. There are a lot of flowers surrounding them and a TV set, so it looks like this is either a birthday celebration or an anniversary of some sort. I'm going to assume the other person was either a wife, sister, or a daughter. This in fact could be the couple from that double room. However, given one of them isn't in a wheelchair and they seem to have drove here, I don't think that's likely. It's hard to say if this was pre-war or not. If it was, then this took place early on a Saturday, which is a little odd to me. This seems more like an afternoon or evening thing. It could be they fell asleep here the night before the bombs dropped. If not, and this was post-war, then they were likely already dying and expired here, possibly due to radiation. The choice of location was likely due to the proximity to Mytics Pines, or because this lake held some significance for them. I don't think they were from Covenant, despite the sewer entrance we can find beneath this platform. The bodies seem to be very old, and it would be strange that no attempt was made to retrieve them. Therefore, I think a pre-war death is more likely, with one or both of them being from Mytics Pines, and coming here to celebrate something before atomic fire took them out. So a bit of a different kind of video today. A smaller location, giving us a glimpse into the living conditions of the elderly in pre- and possibly post-war America. The bodies we do find here are likely from the residents that were present when the world ended, meaning either they expired in the initial blast or shortly after. Given their presumed advanced age and poor health, it's unlikely they survived for long if they did at all. From what we can see of this place, some people died and were subsequently buried here. The why of this eludes us, but I think elderly people with no next of kin to claim them is likely. Or the home was taking advantage of them and their vulnerable state. You could also argue this was a pet cemetery, not one for people, but I think the coffins in the basement make that unlikely. Meaning that at the end of their days, stuck in this home, even death wasn't a way out, and on this ground they remained, just like all the others here who met their end when the world fell apart.